Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this event in which we want to share with you our new postgraduate program, the Specialization in English Didactics from the Faculty of Education. In order to start, we will receive our Dean, Luis Fernando Arias Loaiza, who will address some words to you. Luis Fernando.
Muy buenas tardes para todos. Un saludo muy especial de parte de las directivas de la universidad, nuestro rector, el padre Elkin Narváez, nuestra directora académica Ángela María Urreco, Ángela María Valderrama. Agradecerles por este espacio en el que vamos a hacer un lanzamiento de nuestro último programa en nuestra facultad. Con gran alegría pues hemos tenido el éxito de obtener el registro calificado para la especialización en didáctica del inglés, que esperamos sea un programa que llene las expectativas de todos nuestros egresados, pero además de público externo en particular. Agradecerle de manera particular a la Universidad Luis Amigó por acompañarnos en el día de hoy, a Óscar Alberto Óscar Alberto Peláez es el director de la maestría en Fundamentos de la Lengua Extranjera, quien hoy nos acompaña y ha sido un aliado importante en este ejercicio con nuestra universidad, y a Erika Restrepo, docente también de la licenciatura de Lenguas Extranjeras de dicha universidad, que nos acompañan en el día de hoy, que van a compartir con ustedes básicamente un tema particular que es de interés para todos y que va a dar apertura a este escenario en la especialización. Agradecer todo el apoyo del equipo de la licenciatura en lenguas extranjeras de nuestra universidad, que han trabajado con empeño y esmero pues para obtener este título o este registro calificado en particular. A la unidad estratégica de posgrados que hoy nos acompaña y que nos apoya en el ejercicio de dinamización de estos procesos de apertura y de consolidación de la oferta académica que tenemos en la universidad. Una cordial bienvenida y esperamos que esta especialización, como lo dije anteriormente, llene las expectativas de nuestros egresados y de muchas otras personas que quieran formar parte en este ejercicio académico. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Dean Luis Fernando, for your kind words. Being a teacher implies continuous reflection about what we do in our classrooms, who our students are, and where we want to guide them. This is why the Faculty of Education and the Bachelor degree in English Language Teaching started inquiring about the pertinence of bringing new offers, mainly to the English teachers from our region. With some help from our alumni and listening to the voices of different colleagues from the field, the university concluded that it was necessary to provide these teachers with opportunities to continue learning and sharing their language classroom experiences. Today, we would like to welcome Professor Erika Restrepo Bolívar from Universidad Católica Luis Amigó. She wants to share with us some insights related to one of those aspects that teachers need to deepen, and sometimes it does not become easy to talk about: language assessment. Professor Restrepo holds a master's degree in foreign languages teaching and learning. She has been working as an English teacher for 10 years. She teaches courses from pre-service language teachers and does research in the fields of assessment and testing and didactics at Universidad Católica Luis Amigó and Universidad de Antioquia. Let us welcome Professor Restrepo with a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much. As she said, I am Erika Restrepo. I'm really glad to be here, and I feel honored to be invited by Professor Isabel Cristina to this important event, and a special event for you, as an institution. I want to share with you this topic about language assessment literacy, reconceptualizing our role as teachers and assessors. I chose that title for my presentation today with some intentions. And one intention is like to reflect about this assessment literacy that we need to carry out our processes as language teachers. Your program, the name of your program, let us think about the teaching process, yes, like how we plan teaching and how we organize teaching and activities and resources for students. But some research suggests that a few times teachers reflect and plan and think about assessment. It's like we think this is naturally attached to teaching, and the reality is that it is not. I mean, we need to develop literacy as we develop this knowledge and skills for preparing learning and teaching strategies for students, okay? Well, before moving into business, I want to share with you one personal experience regarding this assessment literacy concept. I thought I knew everything about assessment when I graduated from my master's program in 2014. I said like, oh, I hold a master degree. I already know everything. And I started working as a language teacher educator. And when I had to plan assessment and testing courses for those students, I realized I didn't know anything about assessment and testing. I mean, basic things. And this was kind of shocking because, you know, I had previously worked as a school teacher, and I taught English also in high school. And immediately I thought about my students, and it was like, oh my God, I feel really bad. And I have to confess, I felt pity for my students who had suffered my assessment practices, okay? But at the same time, I found this experience really motivating for becoming an assessment literate teacher, okay? So I reflected and I said, okay, from now on, I won't do this anymore. I won't make these mistakes in assessment and testing anymore. And that was like the motivation for learning about this. And I have been studying and researching about assessment and testing for about 7 years, more or less. I'm still learning, a lot of things to learn, but I can say that I have found interesting things. And thanks to this, I could improve my assessment practices for the better, and for my students to become, to benefit from my practices. And I found also that it helped me to shape my teaching strategies. Yes, okay. Well, we could move to I want you to think a little bit. I think everyone here is a language teacher, am I right? I don't know if the dean is, you have a title in the language field, no? Okay, well, so what were your initial motivations to become a language teacher? Thanks, teacher. What's your name? Andres. Thank you very much for sharing this. It's sometimes hard to talk about this, yes? Because maybe we didn't have any motivation and we were like just there. Yes, but usually we have some motivations. One of those is what teacher Andres has talked about. Anyone else? Would you like to share your initial motivation? What was that motivated you to become a language teacher? Any other? Yes. Thanks. Thanks. Thanks, Teacher Jacqueline, for your contribution. Oscar. Okay, thank you very much for your contributions. It may happen that one of the motivations many teachers, language teachers have at the beginning to become language teachers is the language itself. Yes, this is my case. I loved English, and when I was in high school, my teacher told me, oh, you are really good in English. Why don't you study something else in that? So my first motivation was about the language itself. And later, when I was in the teaching program, I started like to see, oh my God, this is more than just learning the language. I will be a teacher, yes. And what it involves is like, you know, developing all these pedagogical and knowledge and all these other skills that are not necessarily related to the language itself. And later on, when I graduated from the undergraduate program and then from my master's program, I still felt like something was missing. Yes. So it means that we need continuous professional development regarding not only the language, but other areas and skills to do our job. Yes. So usually the last thing we think about is assessment. Yes, like I want to become a language teacher because I want to assess my students. No, I don't think so. So language assessment is like the last thing. And sometimes, as I was telling you at the beginning, we think that this is like included, is part of the package, but it is not, okay? Well, next, please. Thank you. Well, this is not a very new concept, language assessment literacy, but I mean, what it implies has not been explored enough. Okay, so the concept of language assessment literacy has a history in itself. Yes, and language testing and assessment has a history. Usually with the arrival of new language constructs and frameworks for assessment, this idea of language assessment and testing that was traditional held by many teachers started to change. For example, let's talk about the first element, language constructs, okay? As you are language teachers, you know that historically, the conception of language has changed. So language was considered at the beginning just a system, and that is why those courses and tests looked like an isolated list of items to test. Yes, like so vocabulary, phonological aspects, everything was isolated. And from that particular view of language, those teaching methods developed too. Then we had a view of language as discourse. So reflections were around like what is the usefulness of those isolated items in communication, in real life communication. And there we see a new perspective of language, but also new methods. I mean, if language is this, so the way to teach that language, that particular language is this. And in that way, those frameworks as well as those language constructs were evolving, and these originated new forms of assessment and testing. And finally, we have a view of language as ideology. So all these critical perspectives for language teaching and these pedagogical perspectives also, for example, the post-method condition, all this is like nurtured by this idea of language as ideology. I mean, language is not naive. Through language, we transmit ideas and we influence minds. And language is more than a system for communicating, okay? So with that idea in mind, we start conceiving and performing assessment and testing in a new way, from a new perspective, not just assessment of learning, but assessment for learning, okay? Well, other contributions in the field of psychology also helped shaping a new view of assessment and testing. For example, all developments regarding the constructivism theory of learning, how we learn, like with others, yes, how we create these zones for others to develop themselves, etc. And finally, we have developments in pedagogy and didactics. What I was talking about, for example, the post-method condition, also contributed interesting things to this new view of assessment and testing, okay? So it's not that from one day to the other, we started talking about language assessment literacy. No, it is the product of years of evolution in theories and contributions for other fields, okay? Well, next, please. Okay, so here I try to like list the most important, let's say, moments or some reference to concepts for you to understand a little bit more what I already explained. For example, in testing, we can find the discrete point era. If you take a test from many years ago and you see the structure of the test and the content of the test itself, you can find this idea and this view of language as system as isolated items, okay? And not, you can have a test and nothing relates to anything. Yes, vocabulary is a thing, and then you can check morphological knowledge, and it doesn't have to do anything with the previous item, etc. And this occurs in the discrete point area, and it has to do with this view of language as the ability to master isolated elements of the language, okay? Then we find an integrative era. And then we can see how these abilities of writing, reading, listening, yes, speaking, start like being integrated. So all these elements have a sense, okay? So it's like at the same time that we have a new perspective on what language is, we have like different ways and purposes for assessment and testing. Then we find this performance-based assessment. So you can find some teachers that feel the need to assess students through performance, because it's the only way you can see if they students actually manage the elements, yes, the competencies, if they have developed the competence through performance, through real performance. And this is attached to this other concept of authentic. How authentic is assessment that we propose to students in the classroom? Yes, opposed to let's say, traditional ways of assessment as multiple choice, fill in the blanks. Yes, so in which ways is the assessment that we're proposing in the classrooms like attached to real life tasks, for example? And you find many teachers like really concerned about creating an atmosphere and an authentic environment for the students to communicate, and they propose tasks for the students to solve, and they propose projects and those like real life tasks to use communication, especially the foreign language. And we find another concept, which is assessment for learning. Yes, you know, there is a difference between assessment of learning and assessment for learning. With this idea in mind that language is something else, yes, language as ideology, with this idea in mind that the constructivist view, yes, should support all the pedagogical and didactic part in teaching, the concept of assessment for learning gives a new, let's say, purpose for assessment. So now the purpose is not just to check if my students learned or didn't learn, but in what ways I can use that information that I collect through assessment to promote learning. That's a challenge. Yes, that's the challenge. And finally, this is the last concept, dynamic assessment. I don't know if you're familiar to this concept, if you have heard this concept before. This dynamic assessment holds the idea that you cannot separate learning and teaching from assessment. Everything occurs at the same time. And assessment should support learning at the same time, not after something. That is not like a linear process. I teach, then I assess. No, everything occurs at the same time. It's a relatively new concept, kind of complex, believe me. I am still trying to understand what dynamic assessment is. And more than that, thinking of the possibility to do this in our context. Yes, sometimes that's the challenge because we have, you know, different students, different needs, and how can we start like putting this into practice, this dynamic assessment. Well, here we have some questions, but before those questions, would you please go back to the previous one? La anterior, por. Before we have a look at those questions, I would like to know what you plan your assessment. When you plan your assessment, yes, you say, okay, I have to assess my students. What are those questions that you ask yourselves? What do you ask yourselves when you start like planning and conducting assessment? What kind of questions you ask yourselves? If they learn, they like the method and the procedure. So you think like, what you say, teacher, is about like the purpose. So you think like, I'm going to conduct this assessment because I want to check if they learn, more in related to the purpose. And your questions are more related to the tools and the instruments you will use. Any other questions that? What do I want my students to achieve with the test itself or the assessment task itself? What else? Practicality. Yes, practicality. Okay, in terms of time, cost, scoring procedure and everything. Okay, yes, we need to think about practicality too. Nice. Okay, nice. You think of your students, not only the instrument and yourself, but your students too. Fairness. Okay. Well, so Hill in 2017 proposed a framework for teachers to reflect about their actual practices in the classroom regarding assessment and testing. And she says that the first step to become language assessment literate is to know where I am and what I do and what I think, what my beliefs are about assessment. That's like the first step, so I can identify my gaps and move on to do something. Yes, to improve those practices or to change my mind about this. And today I wanted to share with you just a few of those questions. There are many questions. I invite you to read this article. It's really nice because it allows us to think of questions and aspects in assessment and testing that we didn't consider before. Okay. For example, the first one. How does planned assessment relate to teaching and the intended learnings? Yes. Like, well, I have to assess my students, but what is the relationship with this procedure, these instruments with learning objectives? Yes, and what I taught in class. Sometimes we just think about the content of the assessment itself. We forget about connecting to objectives. Yes or not? It happens sometimes. How do learners become aware of when and how and why they will be assessed? Do we ask ourselves, like, well, what strategy will I use to tell my students why they are going to be assessed? How? Maybe when? Guys, you will have a test tomorrow. Maybe. But why? Do we explain learners why they are going to be assessed? And what are the benefits of those results and that information, not just for the teacher, but for them? Yes. The how. Do we tell students like the procedures or the tools we will use so they can become better prepared for assessment? And it depends on our beliefs about what assessment is and the usefulness of assessment. If we think that assessment is the way I can check my students' learnings and that's it, I can say no. I won't tell my students how I will assess them because they cheat, maybe. But this is part of the beliefs that you have about assessment. Everything is connected, okay? Depending on our beliefs, we propose and we do things regarding assessment. We have, do you use a range of assessment methods and is the method appropriate for the intended purpose? Okay, so it is, you considered this part of the variety in methods, or you use always the same thing, quizzes, exams, essays, the traditional tools, and that's it. Or you try to be like, so students benefit from all your methods. You still like to combine or to propose alternative assessment methods for students. Okay, well, so we need to think about that. And the second part, is the method appropriate? That's another thing. How appropriate the method is regarding the purpose. Sometimes we don't have clear what the purpose is. We just think of having, you know, grades, and we don't have like this clarity about the purpose, the what for. We know what we are going to include as part of the assessment. We know that, but the what for, sometimes it's just because I need to get grades. Most of the times I would say. But this question about the connection and how appropriate the purpose and the instrument is for the purpose, I think is something we don't reflect on often. How do you ensure the fairness? That teacher was talking about, like, he thinks or he's worried about fairness. Yes. How do you ensure the fairness, quality, and reliability of assessment activities and processes? So maybe the teacher can feel concerned about fairness, but how do you assure teacher that you are actually fair through assessment? Yes. What are those strategies that you have to become like sure, really sure that you're being fair? Do you have like some specific strategies? For example, checking validity and reliability of your assessment, how it occurs? Or is just the concern and that's it? Sure. Involving students, being democratic. Okay, nice. So there are more strategies and more things to do to make sure that these fairness occur. But the most important thing is to start asking ourselves if we do something to ensure that fairness. Yes, because it's not just about feeling the concern and that's it. Ay, yo sí estaré siendo justo, ay no, pero whatever. Yes, it's like, it's, yes. So there we have, is assessment conducted in an ethical manner? For example, preserving a student's confidentiality. Yes. In this question, there are many things to say, but I just want to remark an aspect is like ethical use of assessment, and not only use, but how you plan your assessment, how you conduct your assessment needs to be done in an ethical way. And this ethics involves keeping or preserving the students' confidentiality. So we need to check our practices, because sometimes we have teachers that tell everyone what one learner is doing and the results he got from a particular assessment task, and this is not very ethical. Sometimes teachers use the information, you know, to classify students or to discriminate students, so we need to be aware of that. Okay. How is assessment used to diagnose needs and plan teaching? Do we use assessment to, you know, make adjustments to our teaching, to adjust our practices? Do we actually do that? Or we just assess and test students to obtain information about what they learned? Yes, so that's another question there. What is the impact of testing and assessment practices both locally and in the broader context, and what is your capacity to influence change? So are we aware of the language policies in the context, institutional policies, and how our practices respond to that, you know, to those regulations? But at the same time, do we think about our possibility to influence change when we assess students? I repeat, many times we are concerned about teaching strategies, and we, you know, we want to change many things and the methodology, and we want to innovate with resources and activities, but from the instructional point of view. My question is, do you do the same from assessment and testing view? Do you innovate in your assessment and testing practices? Yes, it's just food for thought. You're like, okay, good. Well, so the concept, remember the concept I am talking about today. What is that concept? Language, assessment, literacy. Okay, LAL. So these authors here have been like proposing theoretical frameworks about this concept. Initially, a teacher who possessed knowledge about assessment and testing was considered competent. Okay, so I know what assessment is, I know instruments, I have this knowledge on how to do it. Yes, but later on, I mean, through this path of research, the conclusion is that assessment and testing abilities do not only include knowledge. It's not enough to know about assessment and testing. And that's what happens, for example, in my personal case. When I was a student in the undergraduate program, I was instructed about assessment for a very instrumental view, like how to create quizzes and exams, and that's it. Yes, like this. But principles and skills were like little bit disregarded. Yes, they were not like very important to be developed. And that is why the language assessment literacy concept as it is known today implies the three elements: skills, but besides knowledge, but besides knowledge, you need skills. And besides, you need to be a principled assessor. I mean, you need to have all these principles. Well, la siguiente. The kind of knowledge that you should develop as an assessor is knowledge about models describing language ability. Yes. All of you know these models proposed along the history to organize the elements of the communicative competence. For example, Canal and Swain's model, Beckman and Palmer's model, the Community European Framework model. So those are models for describing language ability, what language ability is and the components of that language ability. So we need that knowledge, of course, because this is the basis to know what to assess, the construct, the language construct, okay? Frameworks for doing language assessment, for example, criterion reference framework. So we need to know that along history, some models or some frameworks for assessment have been proposed, and what are those? We have criterion, but we also have normed reference models for assessment. So we need to develop some knowledge about that. Purposes and theoretical concepts, yes? For example, you were talking, Professor Oscar was talking about how easy is the test for students, but also for him to score. In that case, we're talking, for example, about practicality. So we should develop some concepts such as practicality, validity, reliability in assessment, authenticity, many concepts that are related to that language assessment. And the purposes, formative purposes, summative purposes, etc. Relevant theories in second language acquisition and language teaching pedagogy. Remember I told you there is a strong connection between learning theories and assessment, because depending on what learning is and how you teach the language, you decide what to assess and how to assess. Okay, so everything is connected. And we have to develop personal knowledge about personal assessment contexts, which include practices and beliefs. So we need to, as part of this knowledge, we need to develop some strategies to identify our own beliefs about assessment, okay? Because those beliefs are going to shape our practices, okay? We have critical issues such as ethics, fairness, and impact, okay? So we need to think about those aspects. We need to develop some knowledge about those aspects. What are those critical issues in language assessment and testing? Yes, what is the impact that my assessment practices have on students, not only academic life, but you know, in their lives. Okay. Well, regarding the skills, so what is expected from a language assessment literate teacher? Abilities to design assessment instruments, so assessment specifications, items and tasks, rubrics with criteria, alternative assessment instruments, statistics, and score interpretation. So those are abilities in order to propose good assessment and testing practices. And there are also other abilities to critique the assessment and testing proposals. Identification of poorly designed items, evaluation of assessment instruments against qualities such as validity and reliability. For example, how do you ensure that your items, what you're proposing, are valid? Or how you ensure that those items are reliable and that they are well constructed, that they are well written items? How do you ensure that? Yeah, so you need to develop the skill to evaluate your own assessment and testing procedures. Okay, it's not just designing and that's it, but you need to develop some skills to actually evaluate if they are valid, authentic, reliable. Okay. Well, and as part of the principles, we have ethical use of assessment data. Very important, how you use that information. Okay. Fair treatment of students, democratic practices in which students can share their voice, what the teacher was saying. Transparent practices to inform the nature of assessment systems and their consequences. How transparent your assessment procedures are. Do students get all the information they have the right to know when you assess them? Critical stance towards unfair and unethical uses of language assessment. Awareness of consequences, both intended and unintended, of assessment systems. So at this point, I want to connect principles, skills, and knowledge with this view, yes, of critical perspectives in language teaching. It's not just using these knowledge, skills, and principles to assess the same thing, knowledge of language, but going beyond, yes, what students can actually do with that, and in what ways they use the language, how language is shaping their way of living and behaving and being. Okay. Well, there is a concern in the field of language assessment literacy, and is that many teachers do not have this literacy. They have not developed this literacy. And all these studies, yes, from 2015 until 2018 can confirm that, okay? In all those studies, we can read that there is a gap in this development of language assessment literacy. And one of the causes is the courses, yes, student teachers receive in undergraduate programs and, postgraduate programs, yes, or graduate programs. And that is why I am sharing this topic today, because I understand that the specialization intends to fill some of those gaps in students, in teachers, training or education. So it is needed that we develop this kind of literacy in future teachers, and not only pre-service teachers, but also in-service teachers, even us. That's why I told you, I am still learning about assessment and testing. I started some time ago, but I'm still learning. This is a huge field. And in 2021, I conducted a study with some teacher educators, but teaching language courses, okay? And I found that they still need qualification in language assessment. So what caught my attention is that they are talking about that since 2015, and still in 2021 we have these gaps. So now the challenge is what to do and how we can start creating this awareness of the importance of language assessment literacy. Yes, because I insist on this, but all the attention is given to instructional processes. You go to seminars and lectures and everything is about methods. Yes, activities, resources to learn the language, but few are thought for assessment and testing literacy. Okay, what? Now, in what way language assessment literacy contribute to better practices in the classroom? Because you could ask, okay, I know I have some gaps in my assessment and testing practices. I start learning and filling these gaps, and what is the insight here? What for? What is the benefit of all this effort? Yes. And we find that language assessment literate teachers understand the difference between sound and unsound assessment practices. So when we develop this literacy, we are able to say, this is useful. This tool or this assessment procedure provides me with relevant information about my students' learning, and this one does not. So you can distinguish between sound and unsound assessment practices. Use assessment as a teaching tool to promote learning and students' motivation. I usually tell my students in the undergraduate program in these courses that they can motivate students through assessment and testing, and they are like, oh, teacher, you're kidding. They hate assessment. Yes, they don't like to be tested and that. How can they become motivated through that? And I say, when you have transparent practices, when you have well-planned assessment practices, students feel that. And when the students feel your own view of assessment as a tool for actually helping them, they feel that. And they become motivated. So the change needs to start here inside you as a teacher, and then you reflect that through your practices, and the students feel that for sure. Language assessment literate teachers use a variety of assessment methods, a variety. So we can include having this knowledge, skills, and principles allows us to include alternative ways of assessment and not only quizzes and traditional tests. although they are useful, yes, and valid, we can, you know, try new things, being innovating all the time about this. Language assessment literary teachers design and implement practical, reliable, valid, and authentic assessment. Okay, so we have this ability when we develop this literacy, we can make sure that our instruments are reliable, practical, because it's important too. Yes, authentic, valid. Yes, so we have this ability to check that. Provide appropriate feedback to students, not only grades, but feedback. Yes, high quality feedback. Feedback that really helps them improve and not just like inform their grade and that's it, but to improve. And make appropriate instructional modifications to help the students. When I am a language assessment literary teacher, I can use information from assessment to adjust my teaching. And that's why I told you at the beginning that all these help me to shape my teaching practices too. Okay. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope like you got a little bit interested in this topic.
Thanks a lot, Professor Restrepo, for your interesting talk about the importance of reviewing the implications of language assessment in our professional field. We will now approach the characteristics of the specialization in English didactics to give you a general idea of the program. So now let's invite Professor Isabel. She will tell us the insights about it.
Well, first of all, we're very glad to have you here today. It's a big pleasure for us to welcome you as candidates or aspirants to our program. And we're really glad to share our proposal, which was designed with so much love, professionalism, and all our abilities involved. So today we bring you this Especialización en Didáctica del Inglés, or as we call it in English, Specialization in English Didactics, as part of the Faculty of Education of our university. As part of general information, we have the full name of the program, Especialización en Didáctica del Inglés, with a proposed schedule of 1 day a week, which is going to be on Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., right? In order to cover certain modules that are going to be developed every month, approximately. In this amount of time, we are going to cover 2 academic semesters or 2 academic periods in which you're going to have a total of 24 credits. 12 by semester. That's the idea initially. We know that things may come up, but this is our idea. And this would be the enrollment fee for our first semester. You know that fees may change year by year, right? So this would be the initial fee for you to pay when you enroll the program. So what do we want to do with our program? We want to share a humanistic and intercultural focus on language teaching, not only for viewing the language as a system or as a theology, but also as a living thing that occurs every time we exchange ideas with others, right? So with this in mind, we want to strengthen these language teaching and learning possibilities that we have in our region, but not only in our region, right? We have a lot of teachers to invite to this proposal. So it is going to be called as a global global and local perspective of language teaching and learning. Where we will go is to lead programs, especially this one, in our region, along the BA in Foreign Language Teaching, where this program comes from initially. And we are going to propose or guide these teachers to take on the role of critical reflective practices which are going to guide them into improvement, or at least different perspective in language teaching and learning. This is going to be done through the implementation of current proposals in the field, but not forgetting about what has been behind, right? The history of what we have done previously. So who are we expecting to join the program? Well, we know that English language teachers should join our program. We would love to have teachers from private schools, public schools, right? University teachers, language academies teachers who would like to transform their practices in language teaching and learning, who would like to understand not only that we have in mind language, but we also have education in mind for our students, right? So we can expect those English language teachers, but we are also welcoming translators or professionals in other fields that have also had that experience, that previous experience in teaching the language. We know that we can have systems engineers who have a great domain of the language and they have approached the teaching of the language. We have translators who become teachers and who really fell in love with this story of teaching. So they are also welcome to our program. But the condition is having previous knowledge or previous experience, certified experience in language teaching. What will they achieve? Our students, our teachers will achieve skills to identify specific needs in their context, not only from the point of view of what am I going to do as a teacher, but what am I offering my students as learners, language learners, right? And as Professor Restrepo was mentioning before, assessment is part of those inquiries, teaching inquiries, I would call, for improving our practices, right? Apart from identifying those needs in the context, they will be able to adapt suitable teaching strategies so they can improve or change those teaching practices, and at the same time, the learning of the language for the context they are working for. Finally, we're going to have those identification of skills and adaptation of suitable strategies under a critical and intercultural perspectives of language teaching. So it is not focused on what we have been called traditionally teaching the verb to be, but also asking what else is about it, right? What I can offer my students further than just a verb, you know? And you might be asking, well, there are different programs in the region, right? There are master degrees, there are other specializations, but what makes us different from those programs? Well, through the experience of the BA in these 10 years, these 10 beautiful years teaching English in the region, we truly believe that a focus on the teaching of English in rural contexts is necessary. Research has told us that it is necessary to establish, to create different strategies and to implement frameworks that are valid for our students in that specific context. That's why we were saying you are going to be able to identify the specific needs of your context. Apart from that, we believe that interculturality is a necessary thing to talk about in the language classroom, because it is not like thinking of bringing what comes outside to the classroom, but what about my culture? Where is my culture? Can I show up my culture in the language classroom as well? Then this conversation in the interculturality is possible thanks to great guidance that we're going to have in our program. Finally, we have lastly discovered in our group study in the BA in foreign languages that the perspective of critical literacies in language teaching has been taking great amount of attention these years. And we believe that this critical perspective brings or converses very much with the perspective and the principles from our faculty as well. So we wanted to transmit that proper guidance from the faculty to the program, and we believe that critical literacy approaches can bring that different perspective. So what are you gonna see in the different modules semester after semester? We're gonna have in the first semester, we're gonna start with a subject called Trends in English Language Teaching and Learning. Right here, we're going to refresh, update a little bit what has to do with learning, right? Therefore, what it is to teach, correct? Therefore, how it is to teach languages, the traditions, the different perspectives, the current approaches to language teaching. And we are going to have this through this subject, right? After that, we are going to focus on materials and course design, which is hand in hand with what we have previously seen in trends in English language learning and teaching, correct? After that, we continue with the perspective of interculturality in the EFL classroom, where we are going to approach the interculturality factor that we were mentioning before, but from the teaching and learning languages perspective. To finish this first semester, we are going to have teaching English in rural contexts, which is going to be alongside what we have been doing in trends, materials and course design, and interculturality, right? From this very first semester, all of our candidates are going to be encouraged to start guiding a reflective paper that they are going to submit at the end of the program. Why? Because it is necessary for these students to constantly reflect, but at an academic level. So it is not just talking, discussing, reading, but also thinking as future academics, right? So from the different perspectives that we have in first semester, we will have like groups in which the reflective article would be developed, and it's going to be developed in the different areas that we're going to cover in the first semester. All right. Right in the second semester, we have other subjects that complement this education that these teachers will receive. And as the very first moment, we will have language assessment, which is going to be one of those important parts of the methodological aspects of teaching. After that, we're going to have research in English language teaching, where the students are going to have that, let us say, strengthening of their proposal as part of their reflective article. Then they are going to continue with perspectives in critical literacies to finish, like strengthening their education in the new perspectives in language teaching. And we would have an elective and optative course. The elective course is going to be institucional. So it's going to be something that guides or complements the institutional philosophy of our institution. And we are going to have optativo, or the optative course, as part of the writing process, more focused on the academic writing. So you're going to start like basically writing your article from the very beginning, and you're gonna like polish it right in the optativo, which is going to be focused on academic writing. As you can see, there are 12 credits per semester. We hope you follow these guides, right? And you can enjoy like the plan that we have designed for the program. What is best, not only what makes us special, but also how we can continue like our education here in our institution. There will be certain anchoring before coming from the BA in foreign languages. So those alumni that we have had in the BA in foreign language teaching, they will have some recognition or some validation of their studies. So they would cover in a certain way some credits from the program, from the specialization, right? We will have to study your previous studies, of course, like the subjects that you took before, and we will tell you how many credits you can like validate in the program, right? But not only that, there will also be an anchoring with the master's in education from the university, in which we are going to recognize certain credits from the different subjects, as well as you can be recognized in in 3 different research lines or research branches that we have here. Educación en el medio rural, as linked to the English in rural contexts. Pedagogía y desarrollo curricular, as for trends in English language teaching and materials and course design. Additionally, language assessment, and educación en la diversidad, interculturality, and critical literacies perspectives. What do you need to enroll the program? Well, basically, it's very easy. You just go to our website and you just look for the subscription button. It's already available, and you give us your personal information. You upload certain paper that you need. You need, for example, your current CV, updated CV. I think you need a picture of yourself, your diploma, a copy of your diploma, and I don't remember some other things that the system is going to clearly tell you to upload, right? About the CV, it's very important to remind that if you're not an English teacher or an entitled English teacher, you need to certify your teaching experience, right? So maybe a letter from the institution where you used to teach, or if you have courses or whatever that certifies your previous experience in language teaching is going to be valid. Apart from that, and as we're talking about language teaching program, we need to have a minimum level for the entry in the program, right? And that's going to be a B1 in the Common European Framework, right? It might be a proficiency test that validates this. We promised that it was going to be asked for our students, let us say, an updated version of your examination. But as things went like really quick, and we know that exams are very expensive, they need time to be like booked, etc. You need to wait for the results. Well, we're not gonna have like the requirement that rigid. You can bring a certification, yes, that it demonstrates your B1 in the Common European Framework. is not gonna be like, you have to update it right now. No, we're gonna be flexible for you to join us as soon as possible. Additionally, we're gonna have an interview, yes, with one of the possible teachers or the coordinator of the postgraduate programs in the faculty. So we get to know who our candidates are and what they are expecting from the program as well. Well, last but not least, this is good news for the program. We are not even starting, and we have great news from the Ministry of Education. We participated last year, just before we finished 2021. And we received an invitation from the Ministry of Education to participate as part of Formación Avanzada for teachers from official institutions in Colombia, as for especializaciones y maestrías. So they are going to have like a kind of scholarships in which they can participate if they are properly like named as official teachers from Colombia. So they can like participate in the process and get up until the 70% of the, yes, of the fee that you have to pay, right? So that's the greatest news that we have, the latest news that we have for the program. It just had been launched. If you want, you can visit the website to know the terms, like the schedule and everything that you need to participate in the process. And well, just to finish, just to remind you two things. One, to help us with the attendance, we have certain QR codes around the room, or you just can go to bit.ly/UCO program launch. Yes, so you can go there or just scan the code and help us with the attendance to this event. And if you have any questions, any requirements, or if you just want to tell us, hello, I'm interested in the program, here we are. We're going to have Professor Juan Carlos González, who is the postgraduate programs coordinator at our faculty. You can reach him at his email, or this is his phone number, or you can also contact me at this email and this phone number. We are very glad to have you here, and we hope we can see you in some weeks to start our program. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Isabel, thank you very much for your information about our specialization. Professor Peláez, Professor Restrepo, our enrolled students, and all of you, thank you very much for joining us, for being here. And of course, we would like to invite you to address your questions to the people involved. One more time, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Y ya que se acabó la transmisión, los invitamos a todos, ¿cierto? Ya estamos fuera.